Hello, everyone, and welcome to another K6 Office Hours. I'm Nicole van der Hoeven, and today I'm live from Portugal. I've got two guests on today. The first is someone that you may recognize. Floor, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Floor. I'm a technical program manager at K6 or Funnel Labs. And yeah, it's not my first time in the office hours, but it's always a pleasure. So thank you for
I think
asking me,
it's your
Nicole.
third time.
Yeah,
Awesome. And we also have Hans Knecht. Can you introduce yourself too?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Hans Knecht. This is my first time, but I work over at a company called Mission Lang, but we use the K6 operator and are pretty heavy contributors back to that to help it grow.
Yeah, you are the biggest external contributor really of K6 operator for sure. So
We
can
try
you
to help out.
yeah, help out and help yourselves in the process too?
Exactly. That's the whole point.
Yeah. So what do you do at Mission Lane?
So I'm a principal site reliability engineer. So the most of my job involves helping developers write software that is reliable and scalable and useful, that actually works properly, things like that. And so I spend a lot of time on kind of developer experience, engineering effectiveness. How do we give teams tools to be self-sufficient and like make the right decision when they're building software for Mission Link.
Okay. And how does K6 fit into that? How did you get started with K6?
Yes. So Mission Ling is a startup. We've only been around for like 2 or 3 years, and
Hmm.
as we were growing, people started to obviously see the need to load test, but also see the need to continuously test in kind of our lower environments and non-prod. And they started to talk about like, oh, we're going to go try to use JMeter. We're going to try to go build our own testing framework. We're going to try to do, some of these things that happens when you're having that conversation. Um, and the big problem with all of those tools or doing it yourself is that you kind of have to manage your own fleet of servers that actually run these tests for you
Yeah.
and actually manage this. And it can be a really big pain to do that. Normally companies have to dedicate entire teams to like go run JMeter servers or go run Locust servers, etc. And so I started to hear kind of some conversations about this, and I was like, "Ooh, that sounds like we SRE should probably help solve that problem. Let's go find a tool that does this." Where all of our stuff is on Kubernetes, and so our primary driver was let's go find something that is Kubernetes native, like that works in Kubernetes really well, that scales, and that can be self-service. Which is started doing a bunch of research, and then I found. The blog post on the K6 operator, and I was like, "Ooh, this looks really promising." Teams can go write their own test, put it in Kubernetes, and have test runners spun up, run their test for them. And they don't have to talk to SRE. They don't have to talk to a testing team. They don't have to do any of that. They just, here you go, write the test, put it in there. And it works the same way the whole way through, right? If they want to run K6 locally to run their test, to test it, they can do that. And then they put it into the cluster, and the exact same behavior is kind of drawn there. So that's how testing fits in, is that they need to do all of this. And so we said, okay, let's go build and provide this platform for them.
it's interesting that it was sort of a build or buy type of decision, but then in the end, maybe not buy if you use open source.
Exactly, right? Like we got to say, oh, and that was, again, a really big driver, right? Like we could have looked at other things. Like we could have built a JMeter operator. We could have gone and bought a testing thing. And the benefit of open source is that we could say, oh, look, they have an operator. K6 has an operator. It's ready to go. Oh, here are a few features we need to add, right? Let's go contribute those back, give them to kind of the broader community and help out there.
Yeah. So I know that JMeter, because I've used JMeter quite heavily in the past as well, it does come with a distributed load testing mode for free, but it's also not on, it doesn't have a Kubernetes operator. So
No.
that is still a
Yeah.
hurdle. And we also already have, when you're talking about building versus buying, we do have K6 Cloud, which is the SaaS platform that's around K6 that does do distributed load testing on the cloud for a price. But that's not always that's not always an option for everybody. And one of our main philosophies in K6 is that we want feature parity as much as we can. Sometimes that isn't always possible. There's some that are in one and not the other, and vice versa. But K6 operator was something that Simon Aronson actually started because we wanted to make sure that we're not pushing people to sign up for K6 Cloud if they don't really need all of the bells and whistles.
Yeah, and for us, it because we did look at K6 Cloud, I was like, and other cloud products as well that do similar things. But again, we're a credit card company. We can't really ship off or hook people into kind of our Kubernetes environment. We needed to maintain enough control over who's allowed to hit these endpoints, what type of authentication, and hooking up the VPNs into K6 Cloud, for example, or doing it over the raw internet to kind of expose those endpoints. That was kind of a non-starter to kind of have that. So the ability to take something that is like K6 Cloud and put it in our environment and run it inside of our Kubernetes environment was really valuable to us to be able to handle really all of those concerns, right?
Yeah, that's a really good use case for it. You definitely, the best way to, if you're in an industry like the financial industry, you have to be very careful about security, and it is easier if you control everything yourself.
Yeah.
And there's also more control over the infrastructure. So I could also see that maybe, I know that a lot of people don't want to rely on a load generator that's spun up in AWS or something, somewhere that that other people theoretically might have access to if it's on cloud or something. Sometimes if you have on-prem load generators that you already can use, it might be worthwhile just to use those rather than to pay for another cloud service.
And it also, in our experience for us, it mattered a lot that developers could write the Kubernetes, like the tests themselves next to the application code. You could store the load test in the exact same place, deploy it out using the exact same process that you would deploy your regular application. And, like we said, really have it be part of that same CI/CD process that we run through for our application can also manage our load tests and our performance testing and our API testing that happens via K6.
Yeah, that is such a big thing for us as well, because we're all about it being developer and tester friendly.
Very much so. Much more tester friendly than any other platform. So.
And then the other thing that I don't know if this was the case for you, but I also see people going towards operator instead of cloud when the system under test isn't publicly accessible. Was that a concern for you as well?
Yeah, a lot of our stuff. Yeah, a lot of our stuff is not publicly accessible. A lot of our internal APIs that we want to be able to load test and do things aren't, and so it become, again, exposing that out would be a big deal.
Okay.
Out of curiosity, what do you use for your CI/CD pipeline?
Yeah, so
if you can talk about it, I don't know.
No, absolutely. Yeah, so we use Jenkins to build stuff for the CI part, and then we use Argo CD as the CD part to actually deploy out manifests and manage that for us. And there's actually even a little more caveat there. We actually hook up K6 and a tool called Flagger that's also an open source tool that does canary deployments for you, automatic canary deployments. And so we use K6 to generate production-like traffic in staging and dev to tell developers whether their canary will succeed in production as well, so that they can catch bugs much earlier in that process. So yeah, we use kind of a combination there.
That is super interesting. Okay. Is that an integration you built yourself then? Sorry, sorry, Nicole. Like this is like.
No. It's we simply leveraged the happy coincidence, right? That like if you write good K6 tests, right, that actually test your application and actually test your API, and then you run them on a schedule instead of running them just ad hoc whenever you deploy something out, if you were to run that test every minute, for example, or every 3 minutes, all of a sudden you're generating production traffic. Like you're generating like a baseline level of load that runs through your system basically 24/7. And so whenever a developer then goes and does a deployment, and again, we use Flagger, but you can use any number of other tools to do this. I know Argo has Argo rollouts, for example, and some other tools, but no matter what it is, right, whatever you're doing to then compare your metrics and look, because it hooks up to Prometheus, which is very convenient for us as well. You hook up and you look at those and you say, okay, cool, is my success rate staying stable? Is my latency changed? All of that. And you can see that in staging long before you get to production, or in dev long before, because you have K6 pushing out all of these tests. And the more tests people write, right, the more teams write these tests, the more endpoints they hit, the better and better your non-prod environments actually represent your production level traffic, which becomes really valuable later on.
Cool, interesting.
Okay, well, there's another thing that I can think of too that I would use K6 operator for, and it's not available in K6 Cloud right now, but if you, in K6 operator, you can specify the image of K6 that you want to use. So that means that you could also use extensions with K6, a custom build of K6 that you use to run your tests, which is something that I personally really would love to see in cloud, but hasn't quite gotten there yet. Do you just run vanilla K6, or do you use other extensions?
No, we have hooked up the Prometheus extension. We had it hooked up, and then it became part of core, so then we didn't need to actually build our own K6 anymore. But and we do know, like we've seen, there are a few others out there. I know there's the chaos testing one that exists out there, a few other extensions. We haven't quite gotten there because no developer has asked for them yet, but at some point I'm sure a developer will ask for them, and then it will become important. For us, though, the ability to actually run our own image also involved, can we control like sidecars, and can we control other things that we might want to put in there to handle a service mesh, or to handle authentication, or other things that you can't do in K6 Cloud, right? We want to build a Docker container. Yeah, it has K6 in it, but it also maybe has some of these other tools that we need to use to be able to roll to actually test our stuff effectively.
Yeah, okay. I will also put a link. Maybe we should back up a bit and talk about what K6 operator is.
Yes.
Do you want to go for it, Hans?
Sure. Yeah, the K6 operator is so there's a pattern in Kubernetes that is called the operator pattern. It can be described as basically trying to take operational tasks that normally a human would do and translate them into code. And so that code watches for events and reacts on objects, things like that. And Simon previously built, obviously, the original K6 operator, and wrote a lot of that initial code that allows you, in Kubernetes, you run an operator and it listens for a K6 test object. And so you create a regular YAML spec file, a Kubernetes object, and you can upload it, and the operator will handle running multiple instances of your code in parallel, for example, to actually run your test. It will handle what namespace you want to run them in, or what region, or what type of node you want to run them on, etc. So you don't have to maintain that. And so the K6 operator basically just does all the maintenance tasks of running K6 in your Kubernetes cluster for you.
Why was it so important for you and your team to find a tool that could do this on Kubernetes as well? Because you could have very easily just deployed it outside of the cluster.
Well, because all of the rest of our stuff is in Kubernetes. So for us, we're basically 100% Kubernetes shop. We use it for virtually everything else. And so deploying even if we deploy really big pods that might have 20 gigs of RAM to do a load test for us, doing that and taking advantage of the Kubernetes orchestrator to actually handle those tasks for us was really important, because it frees us up. If we have to manage a bunch of virtual machines in either GCP or in AWS that actually run K6, that's a lot of management overhead that we don't need to do. Like, amusingly, a developer, for example, tried to stand up 1,000 pods to run a K6 test because he wanted 1 million requests per second. And so he just submitted the test, and the K6 operator handled it just perfectly fine. Like, I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to touch anything. He got his 1,000 pods and they ran in his cluster, and he broke his stuff. He found out that he could not handle 1 million requests a second, but like, that's really important. That was really important to us because we're a very small SRE team. We're 3 or 4 people. We don't have time to manage a bunch of test servers, and we don't want to go hire a bunch of people to do that. And so the ability to say, oh yeah, give me 1,000 of them, and like that, you got 1,000 of them, and it worked. Like that was really valuable for us.
Yeah, and the whole load tests or tests as code movement is all about streamlining it and starting to think of testing the same way that we think about code. So if your load test can be written using the same programming language that your application code is, then why can't it be stored in the same place and deployed in the same place and managed in the same place? It just makes sense that if you're already using something, why don't you just have everything work with that? Like, testing doesn't have to be this separate activity, right? So I'm definitely a big proponent of that as well. I'm going to try and demo.
Go for it. Let's demo
I say try because this is, I'm traveling right now, but we'll see how we go.
There's nothing like a live demo, and then a live demo on location is even, I don't know. So much respect for you.
I know, right? I mean, I'm attempting
next level. Yeah.
If it doesn't work, well, then I am sorry.
Well, you have a great excuse as well.
So I want to kind of show how to use it. First, you've got to clone the K6 operator repository, which I did post in the chat as well. And then you do a make deploy, so you do have to have make as well. But I've got a cluster and I've got a script. But my cluster is on DigitalOcean, not on my local computer, because I think it's going to take off if I have it on here. This is a pretty simple script. There is just one scenario. And I think for anyone who's watched Office Hours before, I use this all the time. This is my Pokemon one. It just sends a single request to my cluster. And in this case, it's trying to look for Pikachu. It's trying to fetch details about Pikachu, the Pokemon. And Floor, before you ask, I don't have my Pikachu ears right now. I'm sorry. It didn't fit in the 10 kilos of my carry-on luggage, okay? And then it does
I mean, Nicole,
2 checks.
Priorities. Priorities.
Yeah, really. Right. It does 2 checks. One of them is to see whether the response is an HTTP 200, and the second one is to see whether the body of response contains the word Pikachu. And then there's just a think time, just to stagger, a variable think time, just to stagger the requests a bit. Okay, so the first thing that I have to do is to create a config map. And I'm going to use I'm going to call it Poketest. And I'm going to use it using the file. This is the script that I was just showing. Oh.
You're missing an equal sign. You need to do from file equals test.js.
I also was in the wrong wrong folder. But I think I was able to do this before as well. Yeah. Let's see what happens. Yeah.
Never mind.
Config map created. Okay. And then I created this YAML file, which I just copied this from the GitHub README. I removed some bits that I didn't need, called it Poketest. Let's say, it you have to try a little bit more than just one, right? Because that's kind of the whole point of distributed testing. But then I'm also specifying the Poke test config map and the script that I want to run. So then go back here, and I should just be able to apply this. Why is it not finding it? There, oops. Okay. Oh, I probably should have also showed the pods that are up. Okay, so here's all the pods that are running right now, and we see the K6 Poke test stuff that's running already. And that's actually pretty much it already. Yeah, get K6. Yeah, so this is the one that I just started 24 seconds ago, and they're already running. And I think the script is supposed to just run for 3 minutes. Yeah, and it should be 10 each. And a gotcha for this is that in the parallelism, you have to do a little bit of maths because this is 5 instances of the script. So if your script is specifying 10 virtual users like I am here, then it's actually running 50 virtual users in total. So that's just something to watch out for, because there's also, they don't talk when you do parallelism, when you put more pods in there, then they don't talk to each other, so they don't know exactly what the other one's doing, and this has ramifications in terms of thresholds and in terms of aggregating the metrics, which I think you were talking about earlier as well, Hans.
Yeah, no, that is I will say one of the significant features that are kind of lacking from the K6 operator is the ability to aggregate all of the results and all of the metrics from a single test run. Right now, each pod is considered to be its own test run, which means that test run you just did isn't actually 1, it's 5, which can really kind of make viewing those, that it can make that a little complicated and make that a little bit of a pain. I know there's some open tickets on how to potentially solve that, and there's some open conversation about how to best go about doing that. But yeah, I think that's a significant kind of limiting factor.
How do you suggest folks sort of solve for that now?
We solve
as a workaround.
Yeah, we solve for it by shipping the metrics to Prometheus and then aggregating on job name, for example. So in Prometheus, when you use the labels to actually go do your query, you can aggregate on different things. If you don't aggregate on pod name, but you instead aggregate on job name, for example, you'll actually end up with all of your metrics aggregated for an entire job, and it's very convenient like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so how did you react to the acquisition, actually?
I think it's great. It just means more resources for K6, and we already we are very heavy users of Prometheus and Grafana writ large, and for our stuff, we use it for all of our alerting, we use it for all of our monitoring, we use it for all of that stuff, and so I'm happy to have them show support for K6, come pick you guys up, and it means that I just get to keep helping out, and I know it'll keep being supported.
So what were the things that you added to K6 Operator?
Oh gosh, hold on. Let me
look at the commit history.
Yeah, let's pull up PR history here.
Exactly. Just the favorites. Fan favorites.
Yeah, so fan favorites for us was probably things like custom annotations and labels. That was really important. The ability to have your different pods that K6 create have the correct labels and annotations, because that's what we use to enforce policies in our Kubernetes cluster. Most people use labels and annotations to do that. So the ability to pass those down and let those be created properly, and make mutations to those specs. let's see, I wrote a lot of tests for it. That was actually really fun. That was one of my first forays into writing tests for Golang and for operators in general. So we wrote a lot of tests to solve that. And then, the other fan favorite is actually that you can do it per namespace. So what happened when I first started, when we were first looking at it, you could only create, the job name was had to be unique on a cluster level. That meant that no two developers could ever create a K6 object called test, for example. The operator would get confused by that. And it was a really simple fix to make it look in the namespace rather than globally when it was doing things and making comparisons. But that really pushed it into letting every developer be really self-service and really be able to kind of scale that out and say, because our teams basically own their own namespace at Mission Lane. So every team gets a namespace in which they get to do work. They run their own pods and services in there. And so having to do cross-team coordination about like what the test was called, that was going to kind of be untenable. But now they can, it's obviously in the namespace. All they have to do is, they have their tests that they're running, and it basically, just handles that properly for them within the namespace. And that was a big deal.
I mean, also naming is hard.
Naming is very hard. Yes. What is it? There are three hard problems: caching, naming, and errors. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. What are some of the other limitations? Obviously, it's Kubernetes only, which actually for you sounds like it was a benefit.
It was a feature, not the.
Yeah.
There are definitely some outstanding things and limitations. There, especially around service meshes. Right now, it supports Istio really well because Istio is what we use, or Envoy and Istio is what we use, and so I wrote the support in there. But there are definitely other service meshes, Linkerd, Raw, Pure Envoy, HashiCorp, console, things like that we can definitely add support for and build off of, because those, with something like K6 that does a lot of network calls, obviously being able to integrate into the service mesh is a really important part of that when you're on K6. There's also, again, the aggregation part. If you're shipping to K6 Cloud, or you're shipping really anywhere besides Prometheus, that allows you to do custom queries. But like if you're shipping to Datadog, for example, if you're shipping to K6 Cloud, the aggregation doesn't work super cleanly. And yeah, we could definitely make it easier to install the K6 operator. Like you had to download Make, you had to clone the repo, you had to do, like, I think there's definitely some, how do we make the initial usage of K6 operator a lot easier to do and a lot more approachable, right?
Yeah. To be fair, though, I was able to figure it out, and just today, actually. So, I mean, it can't have been too difficult since I'm not an SRE. So there are enough instructions.
It's not super hard, but it is a lot easier if you can just do like, Grafana, for example. If you want to install Grafana and Prometheus, you simply do helm install Prometheus or helm install Grafana. And even for the operators, right? Helm install Grafana operator. You can get those, and it would be, there's definitely some room to see, can we do the same thing here for K6 operator?
That's a good point. That would be way easier.
Yeah.
Are there any issues where you're like, I would love to see this fixed, but I can't do it for whatever reason, and you would love someone else with maybe a different skill set to pick up?
So I don't actually write tests. So I want to be really clear about this. I have no idea how to actually write more than the very rudimentary K6 test, because I don't write like K6 tests very often. And so there's probably a lot of like, I don't have a specific feature in mind, but like there are probably a lot of usability things from like how do I write the test in the config map better? How do I like integrate with options that we're passing in or arguments that we're passing in? Things like that probably need to be solved. But again, I actually that part was less important to me because I don't actually write the test. I care a lot about how you run tests. And then I told the developers, here you go. And they were like, oh, we don't have to run our own servers? Okay, we'll learn to work with kind of whatever those other things are. Like environment variables, I think, is one. We don't pass in environment variable. Some of those things that don't happen. But usability. Actually, the other one is kind of like a UI. Like if right now there's no UI for any of this, right? You have to use K6 Cloud or Grafana or something else. If there was a K6 operator UI, but I'm not a UI person, so I don't even try to touch that. Like I can.
Don't look at me.
Yeah. No, but like that would be. It would be a really. It would be a really cool feature to be able to look at the K6 operator, see what jobs people have submitted, see what their current status is. Like you don't have to do any of the controlling part, right? Still leave that as a Kubernetes object, but just like be able to see what is actually happening, what's going on. Maybe read the logs or something like that. Like that would be really convenient. That would come from someone with a very different background than me because I don't write UIs.
Yeah.
One of the other benefits of having K6 in Kubernetes is that you can also define resource limits, because a lot of times people don't think about monitoring the resource limit, the resource utilization of the load generators, and they just look at the application servers, right? But it could potentially invalidate the results of your test if you're overutilizing your load generators as well.
Or if you happen to request loads or write tests that require a lot of load and then break other people's applications in your same, for example, or things like that. Yeah, we have run into that where developers will write a test just like keep scaling forever, and they won't recognize that they're using all of the memory on a node, for example, or on a CPU, and kick people off or do other things. Again. The same person who wanted 1,000 pods, 1,000 instances of his test, did that. Yeah.
So is that 1,000 pods? Is that like a common thing? How much load are you testing with?
No. That is very extreme. The story that was given to this person was to break our API. Like a specific API, they were like, we want to break this API. And so they threw out, we don't know how much it can handle, but maybe 1 million requests a second. So he wrote a load test that, is pretty similar to yours. It just made a 200 request, like it just made a request to the API. And it did every pod or every node told it to do 1,000 virtual users. And then he went out and requested 1,000 pods of that 1,000 virtual users, so that he would get 1 million requests per second running through this. And again, it worked. He broke his API. People got very upset at him. It was a little bit of chaos testing because they actually saturated our network traffic inside the cluster as well on the node. So being able to define resource limits becomes very important when people decide to get it in their head to just go break their API rather than simply load test their API.
Yeah. I guess one of the things too is that with K6, I think that there is less of a reason to even need distributed load testing in the first place, more so than other tools, because K6 is because of the capacity. So I think Powell, our CTO, he did a test that said that you could run up to 40,000 virtual users on a single instance of K6. Now, of course, that's like a very simple test, right? But still, the fact that it got up that high is pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I think that like that is definitely a place where like the performance that comes out of K6 on like I don't have to give it very much, right? I can give it like 200 megs of RAM and a very small amount of CPU, and it can handle running those 1,000 virtual users that they were making, right? That's like our default is like 200 to give to a K6 test, and that's what he used. So he requested all of this, and it's incredible, like the performance you get out of a single K6 instance. And so quite frequently, our developers won't run more than 2 or 3 or 4 of these kind of pods or in parallel, right? Run 3 or 4, more than a few of those, because the performance throughput is really good. But again, the for us, the big use case is actually less about distributing out the load test across our entire cluster and more simply about like the operator pattern of managing your resources for you. Like that, if you don't work in Kubernetes all the time, it's hard to overstate how important like that principle really is to like, yeah, if my developer wants to run 1,000, they can. If they also want to run 10, they can. But we don't have to do anything to support the difference in those use cases, right?
Yeah. That's actually interesting. I'm going to change the title for this afterwards because I must admit that when I looked into K6 Operator, I always thought of it as a way to run distributed load tests without using K6 Cloud, which it is as well.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, for you, it sounds like that's more of a secondary benefit, and the primary benefit is being able to manage it the same way you do all your other resources.
Yeah, like we could mandate that every test ran in multiple regions or multiple zones. We could mandate like all of this. And the K6 operator would be really good at spreading that out, right? Spread it out across a bunch of different nodes. Don't saturate one node. But where the operator shines is when, if you're talking about just managing one K6 instance, that's really low level, right? Like that's really low level of effort to actually maintain that one K6 instance. To your point, you can get really good performance out of it. Where the K6 operator then really shines is when you take it from, this one instance to, I want every developer to on demand write a test and deploy that test out and run that test. I want every developer to be able to, or every person who interacts can write this and manage it without having to talk to whoever owns that K6 server. Like that's where the operator really shines. Is you get distributed load testing, sure, it's useful, but you also get the management of an entire testing platform basically for free. Like just works, and which is really useful because it means I don't have to do it.
Yeah. So where is your, I don't know, sorry if you mentioned it earlier, but where is your application actually located? Do you have a data center or something, or
we run
are you
on
doing
GCP.
it on the cloud?
Yeah, we run on GCP in the Kubernetes offering.
I was thinking that because there are some financial institutions that are very, or even like governmental defense departments or whatever, sometimes they don't want to run on cloud at all. And so you could use K6 Operator entirely on-prem with nothing, no cloud infrastructure. So it's a little bit more flexible than K6 Cloud, which, has to, at some point, traffic has to go onto the internet to get to
Exactly.
us.
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
Another limitation of K6 Operator, though, is, as you said, you're talking about wanting some sort of UI. This is definitely more of a technical setup, than being able to use K6 Cloud or some other turnkey solution. It does involve a little bit to get it going.
And it does, like, absolutely. And it involves a lot of, like, as an SRE team, we had to think about developer experience when doing this. We don't want developers to have to. So, for example, you wrote 2 files to write your test, but you could imagine if you want to write a test that runs on a schedule, for example, you might have to write 3 or 4 to actually define the cron job, or define the K6 test, define the test file itself that you're going to use, define some permissions to allow it to run properly. And so it is a much more technical setup to try to go through that things. And so as an SRE team, we had to work on, can we build a Helm chart, for example, or some type of customized tool that allows you to, as a developer, to just say, here's my test file. I want to run it this often. Here's the namespace I want to run again. Go run K6. But that required investment from our side, like engineering time to actually go do that, compared to something like K6 Cloud, where you simply get to upload your test and run it, for example, or like it's a much more kind of, especially when you're first iterating and you're trying to find what works in your test and what doesn't work, right? It's a much easier experience to just go to the cloud and click the button and run your test type of thing.
Yeah, even with test data, you
Yep.
would there. I think that that's probably a very common case where you need some sort of test data, so you're not just making the same requests every time. But that also adds a little bit more complication. Thresholds not being evaluated at runtime was a big thing, but I think that you solved that by, well, actually, you just don't use thresholds at all, and you use, I
Yep.
assume you use Grafana for monitoring and alerting as well?
Yeah,
Sorry, I
we
mean thresholds in the K6,
correct.
in
Yeah.
K6, you
Yeah,
don't use.
so we get around that. So one of the big limitations is that if you write a threshold test and your test actually fails, the K6 operator will not evaluate that. It will simply retry to run your test over and over and over until it actually succeeds, which can be a good or a bad thing. It depends on if you want to DDoS yourself. But if so what we do is we actually just tell developers not to write the thresholds. And instead, what we do is we will monitor test failures overall as to, like when you write the Prometheus metrics out, for example, you still get how many requests have succeeded, you still get metrics around all of that. And so we put that into Prometheus and then alert off of that. And then in the same vein, obviously, because we use it for, we'll call it continuous testing, not just distributed load testing, but like actually continuous testing all of the time, 24/7. A lot of our alerts obviously come out of our regular alerting channels, right? Like, oh, my application is throwing lots of 500s because of my K6 test, because I didn't update it to match the new spec. I know something is going to break in production. I know that this is a breaking API change, for example, or things like that. But a lot of that for us comes out of our regular alerting channels that we have tied into Prometheus and Grafana to begin with.
Yeah. And one of the other limitations that I wanted to talk about is that you can't select, well, I guess you can, but it's difficult to select the geographical zone that you want the test to run
Yeah.
on. Do you care about that at all for your situation?
Um, Not particularly. We don't particularly need that function. Like we don't
Yeah.
particularly need to run in like Australia versus here in the US versus other places. It is more complicated. Again, it goes back to your earlier point of being a more technical setup, right? You have to go label all of your nodes wherever they are with a particular annotation or label that matches up to a geographic selector, and then you have to pass that in to say, oh, this is where I want to run. We did write a feature in K6 that allows you to specify what's called affinity and anti-affinity in Kubernetes, which is what lets you select this. So that does exist, but it's definitely a lot more technical of a setup. You have to make sure all your labels match or all your annotations match to actually roll this out kind of everywhere and be able to do that, rather than, again, in K6 Cloud, you get to just choose what region you want to run your stuff in, and then it works. Very convenient like that.
Yeah. Okay, so you can just use affinity as well. All right, it's just still not as easy. And then you were saying, I actually thought that it doesn't work well. It doesn't work at all with K6 Cloud, but you're saying you can actually output results. Have
Yes.
you tried that at all?
I have not, because we don't use K6 Cloud, but I do know people have opened issues and we've helped them solve the issue of you can actually output to K6 Cloud so in the event that you want to run your test locally, but you want to put all your actual test results, for example, in K6 Cloud, you could do that and use K6 Cloud as your UI. You absolutely can do that because you can pass arguments to your test. That's certainly supported to be able to handle where you're outputting. So I haven't personally tested it, but I have helped people solve their problems in the GitHub issue. They open it. So I do know it works. Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
But the big caveat there is obviously that you can't aggregate your test runs in K6. There's nothing that tells the K6 API or the output that says all of this is one test run in quite the same way that you do with Prometheus, and you can query on job name, for example.
So Hans, I'm just curious because you've done all of this in company time, in
Yep.
your free time. Okay, so so is the K6 operator the only open source project that you've worked on under work time, or is this like a thing at Mission Lane where you?
Yeah, no, it is. We work on a lot of things. I've put time into Flagger to make Flagger work the way we wanted it to. We have put time into Glue, which is an ingress operator. We have put time. We try to contribute back. Like one of our kind of main philosophies is we're going to go find an open source product. We have lots of engineering talent in house. We try to hire really good people, and so if we can go find an open source product that fills 80% of our use case or 90% of our use case, we can then go contribute back that last 10% or 20%. And so, that's something Mission Lane has been super supportive of is when if we go find a project and we're like, oh, it matches everything except this little part or this thing right here. They're happy to, have me I make a ticket on our internal side and say, this is what I'm working on to go solve this problem for us. And then we will run it internally. So we might fork it and run it internally, and then we'll just contribute the code back so that we can keep using it until it gets merged in, for example.
That is super interesting. Do you also sort of include that in your OKRs, or I don't know, what kind of sort of performance? It's just something you do.
Yeah.
And have you noticed
expectation? We'll call it the expectation is that like if you find something like that, you're able to contribute.
Yeah, you find it, you fix it. So do you use it at all when you're interviewing new talent, or you're trying to attract new talent? That like that's a sort of selling point, or
yes.
It's not
No, we definitely do. And it's definitely something like I know there. Two of the people on our team, for example, have done similar things. They've contributed to various open source projects while they've been on the team, or written about how to use it, contribute back documentation, whatever that is. And that's absolutely something, like the ability and the freedom to be able to be trusted to go do that, and having the like the extra workspace in the scheduling, have people understand that instead of going and building our own testing framework, it's more efficient for me to just come contribute back to K6, for example, and to do some of that. And that, kind of broadly extends to other places. I know that there are multiple people who've left Mission Lane to then go work on projects that they started working on while they were at Mission Lane, who then they'll go work for the open source project, for example, or go do kind of a thing that isn't at all related to Mission Lane, but they found really interesting, that they found as a thing, and because they were working on an open source project or a problem they were trying to solve. But I know of at least a couple of people who've done that, and so yeah.
I love this. This is music to my ears, but Nicole knows this.
I actually think that is a good cue to also say, we're hiring. If you like contributing to open source projects and maybe you're already using K6, why don't you check out the jobs on our page, or Grafana? Grafana's got a bunch of stuff as well. It's a cool place to work. I say it every week, but it doesn't make it any less true.
I have nothing but good things. I have nothing but good things to say about everyone I've worked with at K6. So absolutely, go work for K6. Nice. Go do that. Be really good.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good. I just to wrap up as well, and we'll leave Laura for last because she didn't really know this is coming. But what is one tip, tool, or technique that helps you do your job? Like it could be something that you use every day, or it could be like a whole life philosophy if you want.
Well, that's a really big question. Right. I try to live by the mantra of a 5-minute rule. So if something is going to take me less than 5 minutes, I do it right now rather than putting it off. And that in general has made even tech work pretty easy. I know, I know that if I'm going to take 5 minutes, like I'm just going to go do it right now. And even if it's painful, even if it's annoying, even if it bothers me, just take the 5 minutes, do it right now. And then, yeah, I'm going to, there you go.
That absolutely makes sense. I don't know if you're familiar with Getting Things Done, the methodology by David Allen, but he advocates something similar. He calls it the 2-minute rule, so a little bit less time. But he has this whole complicated flow chart of basically how to process new tasks or whatever. And his way of thinking is if you can do it in 2 minutes, do it now. And then otherwise it goes into your traditional, your capture process and
Sure.
gets processed later. But yeah,
Cool.
that's a pretty good one.
I feel like I know what you're gonna say, Nicole, which the tool you're
No,
gonna mention.
no, because I have already said Obsidian, so I
Okay.
am trying
You're
not
not
to
g-
mention it. Actually, it's funny because in the last couple of times that I've done this, Tom was there as well, and he was like, "Oh, I already know what you're gonna say, Nicole." So people are saying it even before I say it. So for those who think I talk about Obsidian too much, other people are mentioning it. No, I am. Hola, Leandro. Leandro's in chat. Señor Performo. He's an awesome source of performance testing stuff as well in English and Spanish. But anyway, my thing is completely different. It is an open source tool that I use daily, not necessarily for testing. I think I would use this no matter what I was doing. It's called Bitwarden, and it is a password manager. It is open source, secure. You can self-host it. I self-host it, so that's even more secure. That they do have like a SaaS thing where you can just pay them to store it for you, but I store it myself, and it has like it's cross-platform, iOS, Android, Mac, Windows, Linux. It is awesome. It's one of the best things that I've done to get a password manager in general, and then specifically to get Bitwarden because you can have like organizations. An organization is just like a group, so I have one for myself and my husband. We can share passwords back and forth, and especially when you have this delineation between work and personal stuff as well, it makes it really easy to manage all of the logins so that you have a unique one for each site.
I
So that's
100%.
like,
I
do
use
you use it
Bitwarden
as well?
yeah, I use Bitwarden on all my stuff. It's my password manager and amazing. I love it.
It is so good, so much better than anything else I've ever used, and I've pretty much used them all. Like 1Password, LastPass, Dashlane, everything. I just love Bitwarden. So that's my tip. Nothing to do but with note taking. So there.
Okay, well, fine.
No,
You
you're
can
right. I always do talk about it.
you do talk about it a lot, but I don't know. It's good. I don't know. For like a techie thing that I use a lot is Orbit, which is mission control for your community. So I can find some community insights from there. I really like working with Orbit. I think it gives me a great insight. And I sort of really enjoyed setting it up. And with Daniel, who would normally be your sidekick for today, Nicole, I'm working on an integration for GitHub for Orbit, so that's fun as well, and so that's something we can give back to the community, or if we're talking about open source anyway. A technique that I use a lot or every day, and my K6 colleagues know this, is during meetings I knit a lot
Yes, she
because
does.
otherwise, so it helps me stay focused, right? Because otherwise I might try and multitask, and it turns out I'm not that great as multitasking. And this, helps me focus and provides my family with all kinds of warm and cozy knitted things. So that's an added benefit.
We have two knitters in K6 now. Mihail, who has also been on office hours, is also a huge knitter. He's always knitting during meetings. So that's really cool. One last thing that we want to mention before we go is Thank you for putting that in, Floor. We've got Observability Con next week. It is free to sign up. I can't really say what we're going to talk about, except that we're announcing something pretty big for K6. Not as big as an acquisition. Okay, so that was like the big news of the year, right? But this is something new, a new functionality.
I feel like it's a
for
game
K6.
changer. You can totally say it's a game changer.
Yeah, and we've already kind of hinted at it in different office hours and mentioned it in the past, but we are officially announcing it in Observability Con. I am going to be talking at the keynote. There's a little bit for K6, and also we have another talk where our CEO Robin Gustafsson and our software engineer Olha Yevtushenko and I will be talking about a couple different things, new features to K6, and also things that are going to come for K6 in the future. We are doing load testing, but we have always wanted to expand a little bit. With Grafana, we've added observability, and we're always interested in basically meeting the needs of testers and developers everywhere. So
Yeah, and I think another thing that people should look out for is there's a community session about K6 and Grafana as well by Matthew Churcher, who's a QA architect at Vonage. So definitely you want to check that one out as well.
Yeah, good thing to call out. There's actually a few. I think there are two companies that are not us that are still talking about K6, which is pretty cool. Their use case for K6 in particular. It's always nice when you have your users, volunteering to talk about you. That is awesome and super humbling. Thank you so much, Hans, for being here.
Yeah, I was going to say, clearly I should have just submitted to speak at Observability Con. I clearly missed that.
I probably should have thought to let you know. Now I feel
I mean,
bad.
it's an annual thing, right? So it's not like you've missed your shot forever.
Yeah, no, I'll do it next year. It'll be fine.
Yeah, and also people.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a wish list now for the operator, so, help and contribute.
Exactly. Come say hello.
Oh, so Hans, this is your opportunity to briefly rattle off some things you'd want help with. What would you like to see?
There is a whole slew of there are currently 14 open issues. Feel free to just show up and pick one. There's some unit testing ones. There's some custom data to do data management. There's obviously the UI. There's aggregation. Come hang out, and there are lots of issues to solve. But yeah.
Awesome. Is there anything else that you'd like to plug before we wrap up?
No, I'm good to go.
If anybody has any questions, you can hit up Hans on his Twitter handle below. I'm sure he's super easy to talk to. He's also on the K6 community Slack. So
that is a much better way of talking to me than on Twitter.
Okay.
Because it's like a once a year thing that I sign into Twitter. Okay. I'm on K6 Slack. Like that's on my regular laptop. I'm watching that all the time. So feel free to just reach me there.
Oh wow.
Twitter.
Twitter is like special occasions only.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, so that's really that's when you've had too much of the Kool-Aid when you're on the community Slack more than you are on Twitter. Wow.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
really nice.
Exactly. Okay, Flora, you have anything else to say?
I'm all good. Thank you for inviting me on the office hours, Nicole.
Of course. Thank you both for coming and chatting with me for an hour on a Friday, despite me telling Flora there's a chance that I might get disconnected. Thank you for showing up on short notice anyway, Flora, to save my butt. Have a good weekend, everybody, and we will see you next week in next week's office hours, where we will talk about that announcement I mentioned. Have a good one. Bye.